debaters and other judges are all just who they are, and they're influenced by a variety of different factors. And some of what I'm going to be doing here is going to be talking about how you can tip those factors in your favor. I've seen myself mostly as an argument coach, meaning someone who's spent a lot of time in debate thinking about how to produce the best possible arguments in order to win debates. But an essential feature of that is understanding that judges are humans and debaters are humans, and they can all be influenced by very human elements. And I think, as you all might kind of be starting to be aware, that I think that the online debate camp is maybe bringing this out, that we live in a world of edutainment where there's both the kind of fact side of things where you're presenting information and you're persuading someone, but we also live in a world in which people expect that to have a good time, that they are going into a debate and there's going to be an experience. And we're trying to make the overall experience for the judge as positive as possible, and to receive the credit for as much of that as possible in order to marginally move things in our way. So that was, I guess, my preface number one before I start to get into how to win more. Preface number two, I'm actually going to start with a side thing, which I guess I call a tactic. I'm going to share my screen with you all, and then we're going to go over this. This is somewhat unrelated to the specific thing that I'm going to be talking about, but I do think it is just a quick and fun way to get started. So can everyone see the Excel sheet? I don't know. This is my first Zoom experience in a lab, so I don't know how you all are reacting, but give me I don't know, a thumbs up or a yes or something if you can see what I'm showing you.
They're saying in the chat that they can see it.
Okay. When I have the okay, I see. There we go. There's the chat. Sweet. Thank you. Okay, so what I have on my screen here is my flow template, and this is not an actual debate. This is just a sampling of two arguments that I have. But you can think about this just as a warm-up. Imagine that you are in a debate and you see the 2AC on one page. They say conditionality is a voting issue. This is how I have it abbreviated, con equals VI. And then you have the 2NC making a variety of arguments in response to it. All right. And let's imagine that this was on another page, but I put it on the same page just the way you could see it. That way you could see it all together. We have on a DA, the AF team is saying it's not intrinsic. Your standard not intrinsic argument. Logical policymaker can do the plan and pass tax reform. And then you have the other side making a few arguments in response to this. Now, debate is definitely the love of my life. It is the thing that I spend the most time working on, but I have lots of different interests, and one of my interests, I think you can see behind me, I've got a chessboard here. And in the world of chess, there are chess camps, just like there are debate camps. And one of the things that they do in order to try and teach people to be better chess players is they try and solve small problems. And here's kind of a small problem, and it is, I think it leads to something that you can use in a debate, but it's really just a simple, like I said, it's a tactic. So in this situation, you can see that there are two arguments that you would normally say are not related, conditionality and intrinsicness. If you were the affirmative team in this situation, and I'm going to be asking for I guess, some student input. So if anyone wants to just unmute and suggest something or rate thumbs up or however you've been doing it, is there any way that you see that from the affirmative side that there are ways that you can exploit the set of answers that the negative has made here in order to advance either your arguments related to conditionality or your arguments related to intrinsicness? we'll go over some of the things that they have said. On conditionality, they made an argument. It might not be obvious. So we have them saying the status quo should always be a logical option and logic matters. We have them saying neg flex conditionality forces 2EC strategic thinking. Time skew and strategy skews are inevitable. Testing, hard debate is good. And then against intrinsicness, we have them saying it kills ground because there's no DA that's intrinsic. Politics DAs are good, and thus this intrinsicness would eliminate them, and it makes the AF a moving target. All right, from Dylan, we have saying, if no DA is intrinsic, doesn't that mean that the neg has a lot of DAs, like too many, which can go on the conditionality flow? So, yes, I mean, I would say as one introductory element, you should understand that the arguments that exist on either flow, they interrelate. And so things that you say on one affects the other. So if you say on one that, the negative has many different negative arguments, then that maybe is an argument for conditionality. But specifically what I'm hinting toward is the idea of strategic concessions, which is to say that arguments that teams make in one place can be used against them in another. And this is a relatively high level example because it requires that you know the ins and outs of both conditionality and intrinsicness. And if you've not yet had discussions with your lab leaders about this, it might be a good thing to discuss with them later on during camp. But I wanted to point out that things that people say in defense of conditionality often help with affirmative arguments for the requirement that disadvantages be intrinsic. And so a strategic affirmative team could concede things that were said on conditionality to help their intrinsicness argument. For example, the affirmative team could concede the argument that logic is the most important standard and outweighs other arguments on theory. Notice that one of the primary justifications for intrinsicness is logic, that a logical policymaker could do the plan and pass tax reform. So if one side is saying logic is a very important standard, it helps to concede that because, again, if logic is the most important standard, then that supports the idea of intrinsicness. Another argument that would be relevant is when thinking about theory arguments, the idea that intrinsicness arguments kills ground is a fairness argument. But there are some arguments that the affirmative team, that the negative team has made on conditionality that undermine that. For example, the argument that time skews and strategy skews are inevitable, and the idea that hard debate is good, and you should have a very high threshold for considering what is an unfair argument. Both of those arguments could be potentially conceded to say it's okay if we make it really difficult upon the negative by requiring that their disadvantages be intrinsic. So we will concede that time skews and strategy skews are inevitable, that being hard forces strategic thinking, and that hard debate is good because it's fun or because it then makes debate more strategic. Those are reasons why if we eliminate many negative disadvantages through our intrinsicness argument, that in fact is a good thing rather than a bad thing. And so this is both a common situation that could come up that you could exploit in the future. And the way that you would do this in a debate is you could say, we're not going for our arguments about conditionality, but we will explicitly concede the argument that logic is prior and outweighs any other thing, and their arguments which are defense against fairness, their arguments about hard debate forcing strategic thinking, and the inevitability of unfairness due to the fact that time skews and strategy skews are inevitable. Those arguments take out things that they have said on intrinsicness, which I'll talk about in a moment. It is just a very, I mean, these are arguments that come up all the time. Conditionality bad comes up in almost every debate. Intrinsicness comes up sometimes. Anytime they both come up in a given debate, you can use this tension to your advantage to not go for one and to extend to the other. And more generally, this provides a way of thinking. It's always important to understand that arguments are not siloed, meaning what is said in one place has implications in other places, and to look for the interrelationship between them. And then if you're on the next level, the highest level of thinking is trying to, if you want to, say, for example, go for intrinsicness or extend intrinsicness more credibly in the 1AR, you could try to introduce arguments in other places in the debate that will elicit responses from your opponents that then help your argument, or that then provide the opportunity for you to concede arguments that then help intrinsicness later. So you actually try to manufacture the tension between arguments once you know the interrelationship between arguments and you know what your plan for the 1AR is going to be. So, okay, that really did not have anything to do with the 10 ways to win more during your speech, but it is just a small example, and I think I'll do another one tomorrow with topicality of an actual thing that comes up in debate sometime that you can kind of just put in your pocket. You'll have that idea for the future, and it also can potentially guide your thinking as you move forward. So, the topic for today's lecture is how to win more, in within parentheses, without changing a single thing within your speeches. And so as one of the rules for today's discussion that I have set for myself is I am only going to provide you with suggestions for things that you can do that do not change a single word that you say in your speech time. And that also includes cross-ex time. It's only things that you can do before, during, and after a debate that are outside of your speech time that will increase your chances of winning. So, for example, a thing that I think would make it more likely if you were to win is to say that you cannot ever end your speech by turning to your partner and saying, "Is that good?" And then your partner says, "Oh, yeah, we're good." And then the timer goes off. That is never a good thing. You're never actually good if that is the last 5 seconds of your speech, okay? And I could tell you, don't ever end your speech time by saying, "Is that good?" question mark, and then having your timer go off. But that is not allowed because that would be changing the words that are said during your speech. And so I'm not allowing that to be part of the lecture. I've purposely placed constraints upon myself that set parameters that say it can only be things that happen outside of your speech time. So, some things. Number one, be early, ready, and be organized. This is stuff that takes place before the debate begins. If you're on the affirmative side, you should set up the doc chain from your debate immediately once you get to your debate round. You can check the judge's judge philosophy on tabroom.com. A lot of judges will include their email list there. Or if you know the judge and you know that they would like to be on the email chain, you can just automatically put their email on it. Or you can set up all the email chain except for the judge's email address. And then once the judge comes in the room, you ask them if they would like to be in the email chain and ask them for their email and then put them on it. Have your stand set up, and a minute or two, not the exact time of the start of the speech time, a minute or two before the start of the stated time for the debate, you should email out your 1AC. That way it is ready to go and everyone knows that you are the one that is ready. The point of this is you do not want to be the cause for any potential delays for your round. If you were to just read 100 judge philosophies, probably 35% of them point out that judges are just irritated by debaters that go slowly. And you want to avoid being the cause of that irritation. And that will generally get you in the judge's good graces. And whether that should or should not influence how likely they are to vote for you, I guarantee you that if the judge likes you more, you will get more of the benefit of the doubt as the debate goes on. All right. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but if anyone has any questions for me, you can just you can just unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it into the chat, and I will do my best to respond to them as I'm going through this lecture. Tip number 2 is to learn the common judge pet peeves and don't do them. This relates to point number 1 in that you do not want to be doing anything that would unnecessarily irritate your judge. You want to make your judge like you as much as possible, because that will increase your chances of winning that debate. Some of the things that are very common that people do that they really need to try to avoid doing is you want to avoid your small talk, which takes place pre-round. Sometimes you'll see people want to just have a little chat with your judge. And I'm not saying that you can't just ask them, say hello and ask them how their day is going. There's nothing wrong with that. But you don't need to feel like you need to have an extended conversation back and forth with your judge before the debate starts if you don't know them very well. If you don't feel like you are forced to do something that you do not need to do. Again, sometimes people they see other teams doing this and they feel like they then need to do it. You might be having a conversation between you and your partner about something that you think might be funny, and it might be funny to you, but it might not be the most funny to the judge. And so generally, if you're having a conversation between you and your partner during the pre-round, you want to keep that type of conversation to yourself. You don't want to include the judge in on that, and you don't want to make it something that is the center of the conversation before the debate starts, because there is a chance that your conversation is going to come off as more irritating than funny to the judge. A common irritant for judges is sentences that begin with, and this is more toward the middle of the debate, is sentences that begin with, before we start our prep, ... So for example, it would be, before we start our prep, could we have a version of the doc that removes all the cards that you didn't read? You hear this come up in debates all the time. As your judge, that is understood roughly as code for, I didn't flow, and so I don't really know what cards you read, so could you take out the cards that you didn't read? That way I can basically use the speech doc as a substitute for my flow. Don't do that. Don't say, before we start our prep, could you send out a version of the doc that contains all the marked cards? I want to just clue you into a little judge secret here. No judge actually believes that you're going to be doing something meaningful with that information. It doesn't mean that you won't be. Perhaps you really do need to know those marks, and it's going to influence your speech, and it's going to make it a lot better. But I'm telling you, most judges are skeptical. They don't think that that is the case. Instead, they think that you might be bothered by the fact that the other team is marking their cards, and that you want them to spend some time marking them. And again, the key phrase here is, before we start our prep. It is always okay to take prep time to do these things, but if you want to do that, you need to be using your prep time for this. What you don't want to be doing is adding untimed just downtime to the debate, which then extends it for everyone involved, including the judge, and potentially cuts into the judge's decision time. Those are things that will make the judge irritated. Again, it falls into the category of pet peeves, and so you just don't want to do it. If you want to take prep time for it, it's okay, but it is prep time. Some more things that people do that are just generally things that you want to avoid are excessively referencing people's judge philosophies. We get it. You're smart. You took the time before the debate to look at the judge's judge philosophy, and you saw that they didn't really like the politics disadvantage. It doesn't mean that you need to say something in your speech like, I know that the politics disadvantage isn't your favorite argument, but we're going to be going for it because they only said 2 things in the 2AC. You don't need to specifically reference it. Most of the time, it's just, it's kind of like fingernails against the chalkboard for the judge. Okay, they wrote their judge philosophy. They know what's said in there. Instead, you want to be subtle about it. You want to just adapt your debating to what they've said in their judge philosophy without speaking to it directly. And then the last thing I'll say on this is sometimes people talk a little bit too much about the judge's school and thus what you have inferred about it from them. As Michaela said, I worked during the year for Glenbrook North. I do some things for them. I don't know everything about their reputation, but I'm sure that there are things that if you just polled people and said, what do you think Glenbrook North? And then just like insert 5 adjectives about it. And then let's say you're being judged by a judge from Glenbrook North or judged by a judge from Lexington High School. And you're like, oh, I know that you're from Lexington, and then insert something that you might have inferred about that. It's probably not going to come off the greatest, generally because people don't like being pigeonholed. They don't like being labeled as a person from that school and then assumed to believe certain things about debate based on their school affiliation. People like being treated as individuals, and they don't like having people assume things about them just based on like their prior reputation. So it doesn't help your cause, and it's more likely to irritate the judge if you were to reference that. Tip number 3 is to win the post-round speech doc race. And what I mean by that is at the end of the debate, most judges are going to be calling for some cards. And a lot of judges are going to be calling for a lot of cards, and they might just want the entire document of all the cards that are read in the debate, like essentially like the wiki document that you might be posting if you're an open source team. And by race, I mean there's the question of who is going to send the judge their document first. And whoever sends the judge their document first is the one who has won the race. It matters because judges are going to read who sends them their document first. Whoever sends them their stuff first is going to be the first things that the judge reads. And even though the judge might be trying to be fair, meaning that they might try to evaluate the arguments that they see without regard to the order in which they saw them, humans naturally have a tendency, a cognitive bias that causes them to evaluate that which they know first to be true and understood better, and to not like information that comes later that conflicts with previous information that they have been told. This is generally called path dependence, and you can read about it. It's a term, I think it comes out of economics, which basically says that people are influenced by the information and the choices that they have made in the past, whether or not that should matter for what they do in the future. And in debate, this manifests in the judging process. And one way in which it manifests in the judging process is when judges evaluate 5 arguments in a row and they all go in the favor of, let's say, the affirmative team winning. When the judge comes across the 6th argument, they are naturally predisposed to deciding that in a manner that favors the affirmative as well. When in reality, each of those arguments that the judge is evaluating should be independent. Like how well you did on intrinsicness should be totally separate from how well you did on the uniqueness part of the politics disadvantage, because they're totally separate arguments, and you could have blown out the one team on one and then been blown out by the other team on the other. That totally can be possible. However, judges as human beings, they want easy decisions. They don't want really difficult decisions. They would rather things go smoothly, meaning that when one team has won 5 arguments, they naturally want the 6th argument to go a little bit easier for them as well. They don't want to be creating problems for themselves that are going to add 10 more minutes to their decision time as they have to sort through a difficult kind of conundrum. They're subtly influenced by each issue that came before them, and it influences how they resolve each subsequent issue. Given that that is true, you want the judge to read your evidence first because it will influence their understanding, and it naturally holds a deeper and stronger place for them than conflicting information that they receive later. This is small, it is marginal, Many judges are aware of this cognitive bias and actively try to correct for it. Not 100% of your judges are going to open up the speech docs all, like as they receive them. They might be looking at their flow, but for better or worse, more often than not, many judges decide the debates based on the evidence that is presented to them, and they are going to be looking at stuff probably in the order that they receive it. And if you want to have a small advantage, again, not a very large one, but a small advantage, you should get your stuff to the judge first. All right, tip number 4 is to organize your speech doc in a way to help guide the judge. And I am going to share again my screen with you all. And I'm going to show you 2 different post-round speech documents. And to protect the innocent here, I am not naming who this was, but this was a speech doc that was sent to me during the 2019-2020 college season. And as you can see, I'll just kind of run through it. You can see here are the headers. Again, someone say something in the chat if you can't see it. I'm assuming that you can. But this is what I'd say a typical post-round speech doc, at least in college debate, looks like. This might not be what you do in high school all the time, but in your average college debate, this is what it looks like. And this is an example of a team that put together most of the cards that were, I would say, are the relevant cards for the decision, meaning stuff that, like, you know, it's not every 1NC argument, just the arguments that they went for. And it doesn't include every, like, block argument. It just includes the block arguments on things that they went for in the 2NR. But as you can see, in this speech document, they roughly just kind of like pasted their stuff in and then they just assembled it and then sent it, which, based on the last thing that I said to you about winning the speech doc race, it's understandable. You just want to get your stuff together and you want to send it over to the judge. But as you can see, here's the 1NC. They have it separated by 1NC and 2NC. That's where they're using their hats. And then we got a disadvantage, and this is all the 1NC disadvantage. And then they have some case arguments that are all labeled under say no. And then looks like they put grid here. They must have been talking about the grid, but they don't have any cards on that. And then then they have the 2NC. Looks like in this debate, the 2NC is case. These are some say no arguments. And then this is the 1NR on the disadvantage. And it's just in order of arguments that they mentioned. This is, I would say, a very, very typical example of what a post-round speech doc looks like. So when my tip here for this is number 4, is to organize your speech doc in a way to guide the judge. And this is something that I would say almost no team, even the top teams in college, do this as effectively as they should. You should, if you want to be optimal, again, we're talking about maximizing your chances of winning by improving incrementally and trying to have narrow edges over your opponents. You should try to make your speech doc do as much work for you as possible. And one thing I know that your lab leaders, and I've worked with all of your lab leaders before in various capacities. I mean, it seems like you all have a fantastic group there. I'm very jealous that you all get to spend so much time with them. I really hope that you're enjoying your time at debate camp and learning and getting everything that you can out of it. And I know one thing that that Truth has talked about before, hopefully he's introduced this concept to you, is that one of your goals as a debater is to try to maximize the amount of information that is transmitted to the judge over the course of the debate. I'll say that again. One of your goals of debate is to maximize the amount of information that's transmitted to the judges over the course of the debate. And that can take place in lots of different ways. One of the most common ways is through speaking. When you stand up and you give your speech and you say words, you are transmitting information. And when people talk about who's the fastest debater, really words per minute is not a very good metric for evaluating it. It really should be amount of information conveyed per unit of time. And there's lots of things that debaters can do to try to increase the amount of information that is transmitted to the judge. And I think Troop has talked about this before, like the way that you highlight your cards in your 1AC, for example, could try to be highlighted in a selective way that tries to get the judge to read around your highlighting a little bit. That way you sneak in an extra bit of information to the judge without actually needing to say it. Other examples of this are if you're using under tags, meaning the little bits of information that you put underneath the tag for your card. It's natural for humans, it's irresistible as humans to not read the under tag. We all want to know what the under tag says. And once you've read the under tag, you can't really ever unread the under tag. And so and it's not something that as a debater you speak aloud during your speeches. So it kind of is like free information. It's information that the judge is likely to read if they ever see your under tag, but that you don't actually have to say aloud in your speech, and so you don't have to spend time on it. And so it increases your information transmissibility per unit of time ratio, which maximizes the amount of information that's transmitted to the judge. Another example of this is including a chart in your card. Maybe your lab leaders have talked to you about this before, but one of the major reasons for including charts in your card is, again, the same feature, which is like, as a human, if you see a chart in a card, you got to look at the chart. You got to know what the chart says. It's just, you can't not look at it. Like, we're all like info nerds. We want to know. And so once you see the chart, and obviously as a debater, you don't have to read the chart, but as a judge, once you see the chart, you can't ever unsee it. It's information that you just have. And if that information is something that helps one team more than the other, then that is free info transmission that they have done. All right. So your speech doc is another place where this can take place. The speech doc is an opportunity for you to continue the process of information transmission into the post round. And what you can do is you can organize your speech doc in a way that helps guide the judge to help them see the debate in a way that is most favorable to you. And so, as you saw in the example speech doc here, speech doc example 1, it's just organized in the way that it had been existing within the debate. Now let's go to speech doc example number 2, which is the same debate, but I have organized the speech doc differently. I did not change a single card that was within this document. Instead, what I did is I tried to make it more useful for the judge and hopefully more helpful to your goal of winning by doing a couple things. Number 1, I organized the sections here on the left-hand side according to argument rather than speech. This is because that's the way that judges decide debates. They don't do it speech by speech. Instead, they decide argument by argument. Usually they'll say, okay, I'm going to go on the disadvantage page. I'm going to evaluate this and decide how much of this argument has been won by one side or the other. And then once they're done with that, they're going to go to the case and then do the same thing there. And so you just, from an organizational standpoint, it helps the judge navigate your stuff if it's all organized by argument rather than speech. It just naturally follows better that way. In addition to that, though, there's some crafty things that you can do. For example, by the time the speech doc is being given to the judge, you will know what took place in the debate. This is obvious. The speech doc gets given to the judge after the debate is completed, and so you know what the 2-hour was about, and you know what the 2-hour was about. If you are a more advanced debater, you should start to understand that there are certain arguments that are of a greater chance for you to win on or to lose on than others. Like, you'll have a sense that's like, let's say if you are negative and you hear someone give their 2-AR, you'll be like, they went for 3 arguments against the DA. These 2 arguments I don't think are that scary, but I think that the third one is potentially, if we're going to lose on an argument, it's going to be on that one. As a result, you should organize your speech doc to prioritize your answers to whatever their best thing is in a very clear fashion that puts all of your arguments that potentially answer that argument in one place. So here we have, as you can see, it's labeled answers to cooperation now, answers to impact defense, and then there's a little section of other. That is because in this debate, the things that the affirmative went for on the DA page are cooperation now, which is a link uniqueness argument, and impact defense, just an impact argument. And then we've organized all of them here. And even one of them, you'll note, has got 3 stars. It's labeled impact, answers to impact defense. The link alone turns the case, which is another way of saying, hey, judge, we think that this argument is very important. For example, even if they win impact defense, if we just win a lot of our link, that alone takes out solvency for the AF. And so if you think that they're doing really, really well on impact defense, we still might win, that they have very, very little risk of the case because we're doing really well on the link takes out solvency for the case. And so we've kind of starred this argument as being a really important one. And we've also really organized it, and we've shown that we have many levels of things that we are saying here against impact defense. For some people, and I don't know why this is the case, I think it's just purely a matter of tradition. They feel as though headers, once your file has headers, you send those headers to the speech document or to the post round document, that they can never be touched. And if you were to edit one and say, if you were to change this one to say, answers to non-unique, cooperation now, and then whatever they said, let's say that they were to say, there's an Airbus deal, and we were to put parentheses there, Airbus deal. That if we were to type this in to our post-round document and send this to the judge and just label it that this is our answer to the thing that they went for, that the Airbus deal, that would in some way be unethical, or that this is like written in stone and can no longer be modified. And I'm here to tell you that that is not true. Your header is never spoken aloud. It's not something that is changed. And in all, if you were to ask a training manual for judges aren't even really supposed to be looking at your tags or your headers at all. Instead, when they're calling for evidence, they're just supposed to be reading the text of the evidence. Anything else that they see in the document is purely incidental. And so anything that you put in your tag that just happens to label what answers what is entirely up to you, and it is entirely ethical. If you want to relabel your headers to make it clear what arguments they are answering. I think it's also important that you realize that sometimes you have many arguments that exist within a debate that answer something that the affirmative team said. And if it is not, it might be more clear to you than it is to the judge that is the case. And if it might be a murky situation, let's say they were to go all in on perm do the counter plan, you want to include, you could have your 2NC block on answers to perm do the counter plan, but then you want to also include any other things that you have that you think answer that, and you would include that in your post-round doc, and you want to label them answers to perm do the counter plan, and you can be like answers to perm do the counter plan dash normal means is Congress, or whatever it is that you read. Let's say you read that card on politics somewhere else, but you can put that under the counter plan page and label it answers to do the counter plan. You want to make sure that the judge knows all of those things. I see that there's a question here about the conflicting pieces of advice that I gave you. On one hand, you want to get your stuff to the judge as fast as possible. On the other hand, you want it to be as organized and useful as possible for the judge. And those two things are in tension. I will say that how to get a document to the judge as fast as possible while also being as organized as possible requires a couple things. You should use all of your time after the end of the debate as efficiently as possible. So when you are negative, if you end, it's easier on the negative side than it is on the affirmative side. When you're negative, you have no excuse for losing the post-round speech doc race ever. As soon as the 2&R ends, you should start to build your post-round speech doc, and you can at least begin it with the arguments that were relevant for the 2&R. Because you know what the 2&R was, and there's affirmative prep time that's running. And I know that a lot of people are tired. You sit down from your 2&R, you just gave a speech, you're exhausted. Maybe you want to like do something else or just relax or chill, or maybe you want to talk to your partner about like what you thought went well and didn't go well. To the extent that it is possible, you want to be using the prep time before the 2AR and be using some time during the 2AR to be crafting your document on the negative side. Now, one thing that I see a lot of negative teams do that you shouldn't do, which is somewhat unrelated to this, is you still want to have one person that is flowing the 2AR, even when you're negative. And even though you have no further speeches, you want to flow the 2AR. There's many reasons for this, one of which is you want to be able to get good feedback from the judge, and a lot of the judge's decision is going to involve arguments that are in the 2AR, and if you're going to win or lose the debate, it's going to hinge on things that were in the 2AR, so you should know what was said there, and it requires a basic flow. It's also just good strategy, meaning in the future, you might want to prepare an argument against this team or a team that reads arguments that are similar to them based on what they said in the 2AR. And so it requires that you know, and having a written flow of their 2AR is going to be helpful for that. The other things that you should do in order to be an efficient organizer is just make sure that you are a great user of verbatim. You know all the tech tips to do it, including like tilde and copy pasting, all of that. There's a lot of small things that can go into being just a more efficient user of Microsoft Word, and that will help you in a lot of different ways. 1NC construction against new apps is another place where this comes up, but putting together a post-run document relatively quickly. And you want to, I would say, view it like prep time instead of viewing it like leisure time. You want to use your post-round time like the clock is ticking and try to go as quickly as possible to put this together. All right. Tip number 5. After the debate, while in between the time which the debate has ended and the judge has rendered their decision, one person from your team should stay in the room at your table during every second between the end of the debate and the decision. And if both of you need to leave, like let's say both of you have a water bottle and each of you want to fill up your water bottle, or you want to both take a bathroom break, or there's lunch outside and you need to go get lunch, it's important that you hand off, meaning one person goes and the other person stays, and then when the other person comes back, you come back, and then the other person leaves. The point here is, this again falls within the category of debate is human, and it might not be the right thing, but it is how it is, which is that it is harder for the judge to vote against you if you are sitting in front of them. And when you are sitting in front of them, you are making it possible for the judge to imagine what it is like to tell you that you have lost the debate. It forces them to confront the reality of needing to vote against you. And you want to do everything that you possibly can to have a presence after the debate and to remain there in front of the judges. And a lot of times what you'll see is both partners just stand up, leave, go out in the hallway and hang out and want to talk with their friends or talk with their coaches or whatever. And it's very natural because debate is pretty stressful, and the post-round time can be kind of stressful because like it's out of your hands at that point. The judge is deciding, but it still is very important that one person stays in the room in order to project your presence, to remain in a constant influence for the judge. It also serves a little bit of value in case the judge has any questions. Like they might be like, hey, did you read X or Y card? And if you have one person within the room, then you can always answer questions for the judge. And when the judge is ready to render their decision, if you need to like get a hold of the other person, you can have one person in the room. That way you know that they're ready. That way you can collect the other person. But it's mostly about projecting an image of confidence. And this comes up during elim rounds. After, obviously, if you're in an elimination round, if you lose, you're done. You don't have an X round. If you win, then you advance and you do have an X round. And so if you want to project the image that you think that you are going to win, that you are confident in yourselves, then you should act as though you are there and you're preparing for the next elimination round like you are going to be in it, okay? And so you shouldn't just kind of be hanging out and then be like, well, we'll get ready for the next round if we win this debate. Instead, if you want to maximize your chances of winning, you need to start to prepare for that round in the time there. You need to make it look like you are preparing for that next debate. And also, it's important that you make it look like you care and that you're invested. If you care, the judges will be more likely to care with you. Number 6 is to take notes during the post round. One piece of advice I have for you is to create a running document that you save, and you can put it in your personal team folder on Dropbox, where you put notes from every practice speech or post-round decision that you get, and you can keep this one document as a running document that you use for your entire career. You have it organized in one place. It's just a great like nostalgic thing because you'll be able to look back and you'll be like, you know, when I was at debate camp in 2020 and Miles was talking to me, he told me X, and you'll have exactly what it was written down there. But it's also a great, useful resource for later during the season. If you have the same judges judge you more than one time, which, I mean, it might happen that you have certain judges in your circuit who are going to judge you all the time. It provides an easy way to write down the feedback that they give you. That way you can go back and look at it later. And it's important also for winning in front of that judge in the future, because you want that judge to feel as though you are listening to them and you are noting the things that they say and you care about what they say and you care about learning, as a sign of respect for them and as a sign of how much interest you're showing in debate and how invested you are in improving. If you take your post-round time seriously and prepare and look like you are preparing for the future, the judge is more likely to view you as a type of person who is serious about debate, and it becomes more difficult to vote against you in the future. And then number 7, the last tip that I have for you for how to win more totally outside of your speeches is to email your judges after the tournament ends. Generally, as a rule, some people might disagree with this, but my advice to you generally would be, if you win the debate, you should not ask judges questions in the post round. That should be mostly time for the team that did not win the debate to ask judges questions. If you did not win the debate, you should have questions or a conversation with the judge. And it doesn't always mean that you shouldn't force it, but you probably should at least have some questions or something that you would like to discuss. It could just simply be whatever argument you think was the decisive one in the debate, another way that you thought about approaching that argument to see if that might be more persuasive with the judge. You can even indicate frustration with the judge. Frustration is not always bad. It shows that you care, which is, as I said, important. You don't want to cross any lines. You don't want to be a jerk. You don't want to try and argue with the judge, because once they've made their decision, you can't get them to undecide or anything like that. But it's okay to show emotion as long as it takes place within a respectful bound. But after the tournament, you want to email your judge. And to do so, you can get their email. Perhaps you have their email address from the doc chain, But if you don't have their email address, you can always contact a friend, or you can contact one of your coaches. It's quite likely that your coaches will have either email addresses for that judge, or they'll have email addresses for coaches who are at the school that judge judged for. And so you can contact them, and you should just send them an email, and you should ask them a question about your debate. And the reasons this matters are a couple. If there are questions that you had, and let's say you won the debate, but you didn't ask any questions afterward because you were letting the team that didn't win the debate ask their questions, and then you just let things wrap up, it's a reasonable time for you to ask your questions of the judge then. If you have questions about your strategy, it can be valuable because it gives the judge more time to kind of contemplate it and provide a thorough written response, as opposed to something that's just like off the cuff. But most importantly, and the main reason why I suggest that you do this, is that when you email your judges after the tournament, it is a sign to them that you care what they think, and that you are working in between tournaments in order to be a better debater next time. And if the judge thinks that, they're going to be impressed by you, and they are going to naturally think that you are the type of person who is on a trajectory of improvement, who's likely to be better in the future. They're more likely to take you seriously, and as a result of all of those things, they are going to be more likely to vote for you. One common question that people pose for their judges is, how do I get better speaker points? And it's the time that a lot of my debaters have said, oh, X person gave me bad speaker points. I need to email them. I need to figure out what it is that they didn't like. That way I can improve and get better speaker points from them next time. And they ask me, like, how do I do this? What do I say to them? My answer to that is, you really don't need to say just directly, like, how do I get better speaker points from you? You gave me bad speaker points. Like, did I make you angry or whatever? It's going to be reasonably implicit. Like, if you didn't get good speaker points from a judge, and then you email them and you're asking them questions about how to be a better debater, if there was something that you did that was particularly objectionable or that caused them to give you lower speaker points, the judge is going to take that opportunity, the opportunity of you emailing them, to bring that up. It is always an implied background question in any conversation that you have about debates. And then from there, really the only takeaway is, if your judge emails you back and they give you a tangible piece of advice about something that you should or should not be doing, you want to note that. You can put it in your post-round document under that judge's name if you want. That way you won't forget that thing. But the next time you have that person as a judge, you don't reference it specifically. Again, you don't want any cringe moments where you're like, oh, you told me last time to do X. But obliquely, you do need to demonstrate to the judge that you saw their email, you listened to them, and to some extent, you respect them enough to accommodate the thing that they have asked from you, and you adapt your speech the next time. And if you do that, it not only separates you from the field as the type of person who's going to email them after the tournament looking to improve, but it shows that you are listening, a person who listens, respects their opinion, and is constantly working on your craft in order to get better. That ends my list of things to improve. I realize that the things that I mentioned here might seem to you as being tangential, minor. They're not exactly the type of thing that will revolutionize your type of debating, but instead they're about marginal improvement. And one thing that as you get better and better at debate, I think you will start to realize and understand more is that the debates at the top end, the very best debates that are had, are not blowouts. They are typically debates that could go either way. The best elims at major national tournaments in college, either side could win. And they are, instead of games of miles, they are games of inches. And if you want to be the type of team that has the small edges start to go your way, then some of the things that I mentioned here might be for you. But more importantly, as a matter of thinking, you want to be aware of the holistic nature of debate, the fact that everything that you do in between the time that you walk into a debate round and the time in which the judge renders their decision, all of that weighs on the scale of who wins and loses to some degree, and you should be mindful of those things to try to give yourself the best chance to win. That concludes my comments here today. If anyone has any questions, I am more than willing to answer them. If not, I believe I will see you all tomorrow at the same time where we'll be talking about topicality.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.